is it a dozen cabinet ministers who've lost their seats? Grant Shapps gone, Penny Mordaunt gone, Alex Chalk gone, Michelle Donlan gone, Victoria Prentice gone, Johnny Mercer gone, Michael Tomlinson gone, Simon Hart, Lucy Fraser.
You're doing the
Gillian
full list,
Keegan.
wow.
Well, here we are. The elections happened. I don't think we look too bad considering we've had no sleep at all.
I've got an awful lot of slap on. I don't know how you're doing it.
Although I look like Rishi Sunak tribute ad covered in rain, look like it's soaking wet. But anyway, let's get on with it. I'm John Stevens, political editor of The Mirror.
And I'm Sam Lister, political editor at The Express.
And this is The Division Bell. What an incredible night. I mean, the result is quite astounding, really. The change that we're going to see in the next few days, MPs arriving in Parliament, that on all sides there seems to be a massive churn and some quite unexpected results amongst Labour's big victory.
I think it's the strangest election night I've ever covered. The results were just bizarre, and we'll get into it later. But yeah, some really shocking results last night, real jaw-dropping moments.
And Labour's majority, it looks like it's going to be on the scale of what Tony Blair got in 1997. But they've managed to do it with a vote share that isn't on the scale of what they did have in 1997. It's more like the vote share that they got in 2005, which was the last election which Tony Blair won, which makes it even more astounding, I guess, that they've done so well here. And on the other side, the Tories have lost so many seats that really this is... It's a Labour election. They've definitely won the election. Keir Starmer's got every right to be very pleased with how things have gone, considering 2019 and how badly things went under Corbyn. I think that turnaround in such a small amount of time is quite staggering. But the Tory losses are really quite catastrophic.
Yeah, it's been it's clearly been a bad night for the Conservative Party. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But for Labour, a win's a win. But it's absolutely clear this was a lukewarm landslide. There is no doubt about it. They've won big in terms of seat, but the vote share is lower than Jeremy Corbyn achieved in 2017, and that's quite a thing to get your head around this morning.
I think, lukewarm landslide might be pushing it too far. I mean, that's the voting system we've got. When Boris Johnson got an 80-seat majority in 2019, no one was saying that was lukewarm. That was this thumping, great Brexit victory. And here Keir Starmer's got one, which is the majority is going to end up more than double that. It is definitely on the scale of Tony Blair. But I think that 2019 story is a warning to Labour here that Boris Johnson got that big majority. People were made big promises on how life was going to change in places that had felt left behind. We had all those promises on levelling up. And part of the reason that didn't happen was obviously because of COVID, because of the Ukraine war, but it also didn't happen because of mistakes on the Tory party. We obviously had Partygate, we had the rotating cast of prime ministers, and people didn't see the change that happened in their life. And I think that is a warning to Keir Starmer. You do have a mandate here. You do have a big majority of MPs, but you do need to now change people's lives. And I think that that's going to be the really tricky thing, is how do you quickly show people that you are making life better for them? And if he isn't able to do that, are you just going to see a big swing again the other way in 5 years' time? Are you going to see that majority quickly disintegrate? And I think yesterday or last night in his speech or in the early hours of this morning when he gave that big victory speech, he said that changing the country isn't just like flicking a light switch. And so there's this kind of expectation management on Labour side saying that the problems are so big in the country that people who have struggled with the cost of living, all number of things, waiting lists, the problems with people crossing the channel, that you aren't going to be able to do things overnight, which is obvious, but they are going to need to show something. If they're going to get re-elected in 5 years' time, they're going to need to say to the electorate, you put us in, we've started making these changes, and if you re-elect us, we'll be able to do the same. But if I was Labour, I would be pretty nervous that at the moment it seems we're in a quite volatile state where a few votes going different ways can make a massive difference to the makeup of the House of Commons.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by lukewarm landslide because if you look at Keir Starmer's own seat, I mean, he shed an enormous amount of votes in his own seats. This is a leader who is supposedly leading us to this great new dawn. He talked about this new era of hope and opportunity, but he shed 16,000 votes in his own backyard. I mean, that is not a ringing endorsement, is it? If in your own seat you cannot even muster enthusiasm. And I think also the fact that they lost seats, lost some, a big name last night. We'll come to that later on. But that is not the normal pattern of events. That is not a country that is desperate for Labour. That is a country that is fed up with the Tories.
Well, I think that if we're running through the list of Tories who lost their seats, obviously, is it a dozen cabinet ministers who've lost their seats? Grant Shapps gone, Penny Mordaunt gone, Alex Chalk gone, Michelle Donnellan gone, Victoria Prentice gone, Johnny Mercer gone, Michael Tomlinson gone, Simon Hart, Lucy Fraser,
You're doing the
Gillian
full list,
Keegan.
wow.
There are so many Tory cabinet ministers there who have been removed. And then you've got the big characters on top of that. Obviously, Liz Truss, the first former Prime Minister, I think in over 100 years to lose her seat. And some people would say perhaps that's karma for what happened under her as Prime Minister. But what's left now for the Tory party? How on earth do they pick up from here? And what's really the kind of, what prescription can they have to sort themselves out?
Well, look, there's two schools of thought, aren't there? There's one that you need to sort this out very quickly, get a new team in place very quickly and start that process straight away. And another school of thought where you actually take a lot of time to do some soul searching, to work out what the Tory party stands for and really kind of come to a conclusion about whether it's you need to tack to the left or to the right. I think the second is probably self-indulgent and time-wasting. And I think the so-called greybeards in the party are very keen to get this sorted out very, very quickly because they think that actually come September, Keir Starmer will be there. He'll be inflicting massive change on the country. They need a new Tory party top team in place to hold Labour to account. And if you are navel-gazing, then that gives Keir Starmer free rein to do what he wants with his big majority. So I think they will sort it out very quickly. But I think obviously there's a lot of experience in the party that's gone overnight, and that makes it difficult. Clearly, there are a couple of front runners, Kemi Bade not being one of them. But yeah, I think in the next few days, what we will see is we'll obviously have to have a new election of a new 1922 committee chairman, Sir Graham Brady, now Lord Brady actually. He stood down at the election, so he will need to be replaced. But I think he left plans in place for what happens on Monday. And I think within that first week, you will see that election. And then between that group and the board, they will put in place a plan to sort out the leadership contest that inevitably is going to follow.
I think if Tories are going to make a comeback, then, as you say, they do need to come up with a plan of what are we going to do. They do need to stop the infighting because we know the public don't like that. And we know the last few years that have been dominated by Tory rows and the five families and the different alphabet groups, ERG, and all the long list of groups that now we won't have to worry about. Yeah. But I just don't understand what they're going to do. No. You look at Jeremy Corbyn's defeat in 2019, and quite quickly Labour thought, we need to go back to the centre ground. That's where parties win elections. And you look at Labour getting that big majority despite not getting a record vote share. That's because they were in the centre ground. They weren't just piling up votes in seats that they already held. But I just don't quite see, where do the Tory party go from here when you're fighting reform on one side and you are fighting Labour on the other side? And I just think that the party is going to be very splintered in their diagnosis of what do they do now. And I think the difficult thing for whoever comes next as leader is, because they are such a reduced number of MPs now, the threshold of people you need to sign letters to challenge a leader is going to go down.
It's going to be about 20.
So
I mean, we'll have constant challenges if that is the case.
And I just think that if you do get a new leader, they don't manage to turn things around in the polls very quickly, then I think you are maybe going to have a perma-crisis within the Tory party.
I think that the Tory party is all. There's a reason it's the most successful in the world electorally, and has been. It has always had this capacity to reinvent itself when it needs to, and so ultimately, Conservative MPs know that you have to be in power to do things, and whereas Labour traditionally has kind of gone down a rabbit hole of ideological purity, the Conservative Party always sees that, fine, you have to make compromises to get what you need to get done, and that's why they tend to win more often. Now, we've seen a reverse of that at the moment. We've seen Keir Starmer understand that you need to compromise and be pragmatic to get into power to do what you need to do, and the Tory party be set by infighting and demands that we're not being conservative enough, and then those groups, those MPs in the centre saying, actually, no, you always win from the centre, and this big divide happening. I think Rishi Sunak, clearly there is going to be an awful lot of blame heaped on him, and I've always said that his decision to go early was one that I thought was, well, let's just say it, bonkers. It just was. It made no sense to me on any level. But it doesn't matter. Even if you'd gone in November,
It might have been a similar place.
They were still going to have a big defeat. That was clear. So he might be massively blamed for going early and losing them a few more seats, but I'm not sure ultimately it is all Rishi Sunak's fault. And he was very clear when he took over the party. And obviously when he took over the party from Liz Truss, it was in a bad place. And he went to the 1922 committee to speak to all those backbenchers and said, look, unite or die. And they chose to die.
Yeah. And
they have to then look at this and realise, if you do go into all these groups and then hold your own little press conferences, much as, I as a journalist love that. I want to be there for all those events. It's exciting and there's a lot going on. That does not help your party. You need some discipline. And whoever takes over has to be absolutely ruthless in dealing with anybody who thinks they are bigger than the party. They are not. And you see these figures who know how to create a splash and create a headline, but that is not what wins elections. When you've got different groups, 5 families, or even the One Nation group started putting out their own press releases, they should be a cohesive group, and that's what Keir Starmer's managed to do with Labour. Whether he will manage to maintain that discipline now is a whole other story, but for the Tories, they've got to rediscover a bit of discipline.
Yeah, and it felt like for a long time they've almost got addicted to this behaviour of splintering, with people wanting to come out and do these press conferences and get attention, wanting to have all this speculation about how many letters are in. And it almost felt at one point when the Tory MPs were trying to get rid of Lindsay Hoyle, that was almost an outlet for this. We constantly need to be getting rid of someone. If it's not the Prime Minister, let's get rid of the Common Speaker. I guess the question of who comes next is partly now going to be restricted by who has kept their seats. Yeah. So Grant Shapps, for a long time, people have been talking about how he's been sounding people out behind the scenes. He's obviously lost his seat. Penny Mordaunt, someone who did quite well in Tory leadership contests in the past. We knew that she was preparing another bid. She obviously lost her seat in Portsmouth North, so she can't run again. You mentioned Kemi Badenoch. She kept her seat. Suella Braverman kept her seat. Robert Jenrick kept his seat. Priti Patel kept her seat. Is there anyone else you reckon who might be in the running?
There's Tom Tugendhat. Obviously, he's a good centrist candidate, and I think he is. Or he's made it clear. He made it clear before the actual polling day, didn't he, that he would be interested. So I think it will be a bit of a battle now between those. I would be surprised if Suella Braverman actually manages to get anywhere with her bid, even though in her speech last night, she was quite clear in signalling that she intends to run. I think Robert Jenrick is the person who carries that torch, but in a perhaps more friendly way for other wings of the party.
I'm surprised Suella Braverman's not launched a campaign already, because when Boris Johnson was on the ropes, while she was still in the cabinet, she basically went on TV and said, I'm launching my leadership bid, even though he wasn't gone. So I'm surprised that she's not been out already. Nigel Farage has obviously finally got a seat, his 8th time trying. He will finally be in the House of Commons. It looks like Reform are going to end up with, is it 4 MPs?
Yeah, we're looking at.
Which is obviously, for them, it is an increased number of MPs. So far, they only had Lee Anderson, who obviously got elected as a Tory and then defected. But it isn't as stunning, their victory, as when the exit poll dropped, it was suggestions they could win 13 seats, which would have been quite a thing. And it looked like they were going to take seats from Labour in places like Hartlepool and, well, not Hartlepool, that's where the Tories had it, but Labour were targeting that seat. And Barnsley seats, it looked like they were going to take them away. And even though they did run, they're the second party to Labour in loads of those seats across the North East, loads of those seats that declared early. But they aren't going to have the same big force in Parliament that we thought they might have ended up with.
No. I think this is the problem. We saw it with UKIP, didn't we, in 2015, that they managed to amass a large number of votes. There is clearly
4 million votes. Almost, I think it's slightly more, but it's about 4 million votes both times and not many MPs.
Now, I think the lesson from this election is you need to be really strategic about where you focus your resources because, as we've discussed, Labour have a huge majority, but based on a pretty small vote share, really. The Lib Dems, who everyone, has kind of really, I mean, me included, as a media, we have failed to really give them any scrutiny. They've just been larking about, and then they've snuck in and got all these seats. But they are relentless and known for being, once they get a grip locally, if they get a local councillor in somewhere, then they cling on and they build and build and build and they're not letting go.
Your postbox pays the punishment if you elect a Lib Dem councillor.
Absolutely. Winning here, those famous bar charts. So we can see that if you are clever about where you target your resources and you build a geographical base, it pays off. Now, what Reform hasn't done, and really they should have learnt the lesson because the previous incarnation, UKIP, back in 2015, was in exactly the same position in that it was very popular nationally, but its vote was spread so thinly. And what you really need to do is don't field 600 and odd candidates that you're not capable of vetting, that you pay a company that is also not capable of vetting. Don't field 600 candidates who've never got hope. Field maybe 20 who've got a really good chance, or 50.
Or even 100.
Even 100
that you've properly looked into.
Put some proper resources into it, focus it, target it, get people out on the ground and convert that support into MPs. Now, actually, I think 4 MPs is still a really stunning result for Reform. Nobody really expected them at the start of this campaign to get anywhere. Even Nigel Farage wasn't really expected to get that seat in Clacton at the start of this campaign when he announced. They have come from a standing start to get 4 seats, which is actually really remarkable and testament to Nigel Farage and his ability to connect with voters. And they just need to have, they need a bit of discipline, don't they? They need discipline, they need focus, they need to be able to target that support. So my key message is, if you're on the right, remember to be a bit disciplined in future. Stop kind of being self-indulgent and mucking about.
Although mucking about did seem to go quite well for Ed Davey.
Well, yes, yeah.
They've ended up with over 70 seats, which is a record. I think the biggest number they've ever had before was 62, so it's more than that. And obviously, ever since the coalition years, they've been reduced to just a rump in Parliament. Now we're going to see them back as this big force again. Obviously, because of the collapse in the SNP, who look like they've just gone down to a handful of seats, Lib Dems going to be back as the third biggest party. We're going to see Lib Dems having the third questions, or Ed Davey will be the person who comes after the opposition leader. At PMQs, they will get a lot more prominence. They'll get more places on things like Commons, select committees. But as you say, during the campaign, they did have some quite interesting policies on health and social care. And that's obviously something that Ed Davey was able to talk about, the personal impact and his experience with dealing with care as a carer. But for most of the campaign, what voters predominantly saw from the Lib Dems was Ed Davey, I don't know, on a slip and slide, Ed Davey bungee jumping, Ed Davey on
Roller
paddleboarding. I can't even remember.
Doing Zumba. I mean, we saw far too much of him in his shorts. So hopefully he'll keep his trousers on from now on.
Yeah, hopefully he'll do hit PMQs in a suit rather than a wetsuit.
Yeah.
But let's see. But it's just remarkable how they have managed to just pick up so many seats. And as you say, they haven't received the same scrutiny and media attention as Reform.
Reform have picked up 4 seats, and the relentless focus on Reform compared to the Lib Dems is, again, it is because Nigel Farage is interesting. He's captivating. The media is interested in what he has to say because voters are interested. I don't wish to be disparaging, but Davey just doesn't have that same ability
pizzazz.
He doesn't have pizzazz, does he? So, in a way, I think perhaps voters think, oh, the Lib Dems, they're kind of if I don't want to vote Tory, I can vote Lib Dem. It's a safe thing to do. And same for Labour voters. It's a kind of repository for protest votes traditionally, isn't it, as a party? And I think in many ways people aren't so concerned because they don't think actually they will ever really become much more than they are now, which is the third party. And so you don't have to worry too much because they've kind of plateau that in reality are they ever really going to be much bigger than they are, and so you can kind of safely vote for them, can't you, without having to really think too much about what they actually stand for. But I think with Nigel Farage, people either love him or hate him, and so you are much more likely, if you hate him, to be very incensed and want to kind of stop him, whereas nobody really bothers too much about the Lib Dems, do they? It's a bit fine, the Lib Dems are there, but we don't have to kind of worry either way.
And shall we chat about what comes next in the next few weeks? So Parliament, it looks like we'll sit until the end of July, that the summer break will be shortened slightly, but it only means we've got a few more weeks for the new Labour government to do things. Next week, Keir Starmer will go on his big foreign trip. He's going to a NATO summit in Washington, D.C., where he'll meet other world leaders, Joe Biden. It's possible he might go to Ukraine at some point quite early on, I'd reckon, to show that Britain's got a continuing commitment to Ukraine. And then we'll have the King's speech, I think, is it the 17th of July, when they're set out which things that we set out in the manifesto do we think need a change in the law, and which are the things we're going to get on with quite quickly.
Is that when we find out what he actually is planning to do?
I think we saw that in the manifesto. I think we saw that with the 6 steps. But yeah, I think that Labour are going to need to show in the next few weeks, and they are going to be keen to do it, things like house building. They talked about a lot how they weren't going to put up people's taxes, how they were going to do it through economic growth. And we know that big way you get economic growth is if you get on with building. And there are loads of crises that are there flashing away that do need to be dealt with. Things like prisons, they are going to need to work out what exactly are they going to do, because prisons are fit to bursting. Every few weeks there are warnings that we are just literally going to run out of prison places, that when people get arrested, there's just going to be nowhere to put them. And it's not clear yet what exactly Labour are going to do about that.
I think the prison thing is absolutely fascinating because it is almost a day one priority. The prisons, they've gone past their maximum capacity. It is now a crisis point. And we saw that Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, who obviously lost his seat last night, he had to make some quite difficult decisions about releasing people early. Labour were very critical of that. They basically accused the government of letting out wife beaters early, which I think the former government, the government at the time, absolutely refuted. But Labour
the government at the time wouldn't tell us who they were letting out, which was a slight problem.
But this is going to be Keir Starmer's problem now, isn't it? Who is he going to let out? He's going to have to let out somebody. And what type of prisoner is he going to let out? And he's going to have to do it on quite a big scale. Either that, or he goes down the Anne Widdecombe route of getting in some boats and putting prisoners on boats. So, he has some tough choices to make. I don't think he's going to go down that route, which means he will have to find some way of letting out quite a big number of prisoners quite quickly.
Yeah, because you can't just build prisons overnight. Keir Starmer said that itself. You can't. So there are some options. You could do, one of the things the Tories was looking at was do you stop people getting sentences of under 12 months? Because I think the statistics show that if you give someone a sentence of under 12 months, that their likelihood to reoffend is much more than if you gave them kind of stricter restrictions. You put an ankle tag on them, you gave them strict probation officer monitoring. The other option that's been suggested by the Prison Governors Association is, instead of people being automatically released 50% through their sentence, would you do it 40%? Now, if you did that, then you would see large numbers of people being let out from prison much earlier, and that would relieve the pressure. But again, that would be something that would be fairly controversial, but they are going to have to take one of these options. They're all not great options. They're all options which come with difficulties, but they're going to have to do something if they're going to be able to find a way to cope with the problem.
This is the reality of government, isn't it? It's choices, it's difficult choices. It's very easy to throw rocks on the sidelines. Now they're going to be faced with this reality, and it is tough. And actually, I think allowing people out or not sending people to prison who get 12-month sentences, this is a really big issue, actually, because we have had a shoplifting crisis. I mean, shoplifting has essentially been decriminalised for some time now. People are just going into shops and clearing them out with absolutely no recourse whatsoever. And people are fed up of it. We're all paying more for it as a result. Security guards just are too afraid to stop them. These are organised gangs doing it. These are individuals doing it. If you essentially say nobody... the supposed low-level crime is no longer something that attracts a jail sentence, then you are effectively giving free rein to people to carry on doing that. So this is a very difficult issue for them. But I think, John, anyway, let's talk about... It's a big night for the Labour Party. It's a momentous night for the Mirror, actually. You know, it's your team. You've been there with him. You obviously interviewed Keir Starmer the day before, 2 days before. I've lost track.
I can't even remember the days. It was on Tuesday, I think.
But tell me what you thought about last night's results, because obviously it was a complicated set of results. There were some people who lost out last night. Two big figures from the Labour Party lost their seats in this landslide. So tell us what you think about what happened.
I think there is an amazing win, and I think that you look at those numbers, it is something that we haven't seen since 1997, a change of government from the Tories to Labour, and they haven't just slipped in, they have won quite decisively. There are obviously some disappointments in there, some cabinet ministers, some of them that we didn't expect to, some shadow cabinet ministers. So Thangam Debonair in Bristol Central, she lost out to the Green co-leader. She was someone who was thought in the last few weeks that she would be quite likely to lose. But there were surprises. Jonathan Ashworth, who's the Shadow Paymaster General, who's been real cheerleader for Labour. He's been someone who's been very visible in the campaign. He's the Labour front bench who put the Tory manifesto in the shredder. He's the person who's always seemed to be willing to go on TV in the good times and the bad. Lost his seat in Leicester South to an independent. That was a bit of a shock, and I think that will really hurt for a lot of people in the Labour Party, that he was someone there who was dynamic and kind of always up for it in terms of taking on the Tories with the fight, and he's obviously gone. And someone like Wes Streeting, who's obviously got a massive profile, he won by 500 votes in Ilford, which was maybe not as convincing as some people would have thought. Shabana Mahmood was someone who people thought might have lost because of the backlash over Gaza. She actually did managed to keep her seat. I think that there are things that Labour will need to look at there. You know, obviously they can't go back in time and change how they dealt with the Gaza issue. But I think there are concerns there. There are, how do you bring back some of these communities to vote for Labour again? How can you repair those relations? I think that is something for them to work on.
I think that Jonathan Ashworth was, for me, one of the jaw-dropping moments of the night. When that came through, I couldn't believe it, because he's been sent out by the party almost every day to go on the TV or the radio. And why were they doing that if his seat was so at risk? I just don't understand why he wasn't dispatched off to his constituency to fight that hard. there's plenty of other people who are decent performers in the front bench. Why did they not actually protect him in his seat? It seemed like a real sloppy move, actually, to lose somebody like that in that almost accidental way. I guess when you are looking at such a kind of big change in numbers, maybe these things happen. But I think he will be feeling incredibly bruised this morning.
Sam, what is your moment of the week?
Well, I've got a double whammy. I think it was such a big night. Such a big night. Let's get two for the price of one. So I think there were a couple of, obviously there were a lot of interesting results, but there were a couple that really stood out for me. One was Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Tory party leader, who had a majority of just over 1,000 and was absolutely expected to go. But clearly he is a man who has been in Chingford for a long, long time, knows that patch inside out. It has changed a bit demographically, but he was essentially saved by Faisal Shaheen, who was a Labour candidate, but then ousted by the party centrally, very upset about it, stood as an independent, got an awful lot of backing, was very popular locally. And essentially, she split the Labour vote significantly, which allowed Ian Duncan-Smith to return with a majority, actually increase his majority. It went to something like 5,000. And then I think the other, on the flip side, on the Labour side, Jeremy Corbyn made a sensational comeback. So again, another candidate who was blocked by high command from standing as the party representative, despite being an ex-party leader. And locally really popular and absolutely stormed it in his patch. So quite interesting that people don't like to be told what to do. The voters don't like being bossed around by party high command. So I think that was a bit of a signal there. What's yours, John?
Mine. Well, I would say Liz Truss losing her seat, although I'd actually gone to bed at that moment. That was
you weren't up for Liz Truss.
That was the small window of 1 hour when I was actually asleep. I think possibly the moment was the speech by Keir Starmer in the Tate Modern, when you obviously had all the declarations, but then you had his speech there. He was there with his wife Vic. He was there with the podium. And I think that was really the moment that it felt like this is a really special election. This isn't just one of those elections where a few seats change hands. This is a kind of big moment for our country. He talked about how, the sun was rising. I can't quite remember the exact metaphor.
He's chucking it down now, so I don't know what that means.
He said the sun was rising. He's basically saying, there's loads of hope, there's loads of change coming. That to me felt like that was the moment of the night. Right, we will be back on Tuesday next week. Do get in touch with us. Tell us what you thought of the election. Our email address is thedivisionbell@reachplc.com, and we will see you next week.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. This is a Reach Studio production hosted by myself, John Stevens, and Sam Lister. Produced and edited by Lydia O'Malley and Shabir Nuzai. Our researcher is Sheila Mahmoodi, and designs have been done by Curtis Phillips-Cozier and Luke Stidson. Audio managed by Matt Millard and social content managed by Gully Burrows and Ed Washington. Content production and design overseen by Yara Silver, Harry Demonell and Spencer Robotham.